The threat of being laid off was there from day one. And so I was building my business on the side as a safety net, but also knowing that that's probably what I wanted to end up doing in the long run was working for myself. I think part of it too is just finding my niche. It really helped that I don't specialize in any one kind of photography. I just do journalism wherever it's needed. I'll do journalism photography at a business. I'll do it at a bar mitzvah. I'll do it at a birthday party. I'll do it for a giant corporate event.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Photo Forward podcast, where we explore the stories behind some of the greatest visual storytellers in the world. From their photographic origins to finding work-life balance as creative professionals, to how to actually make a living as a photographer, videographer, or multimedia creator. We're going to uncover what makes them tick and their shutters click. I'm your host, Ben Brewer. When you hear the word photojournalist, what comes to mind? A warzone or conflict photographer, a sports shooter lugging a few supertelephoto lenses around the sidelines of a professional sporting event? Or maybe it's the fly on the wall, spending countless hours following a singular subject, telling a poignant story with images. Well, in my mind, it's all of that and none of that. Let me explain. These tropes exist for a reason. They are often true. But today's episode gets at the heart of photojournalism, applying our craft of using photos and videos to tell the most authentic human story possible visually. Photojournalism is everywhere. And today's guest shares her mind state and outlook as a photojournalist and editorial photographer, and how that's helped her position herself as an expert in her craft, no matter her location. Ruthie Hauge's roots are in photojournalism and art. She received a scholarship to attend Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design, where she majored in photography and minored in drawing. She was hired as a staff photographer by Sun Times Media in Illinois, where she worked for almost 7 years and earned 18 state and national photojournalism awards. In the summer of 2012, Ruthie gave up her staff position to focus on her business and her new role as mom. According to her bio, before a long day of photography, Ruthie's pregame ritual includes 8+ hours of sleep, a burger, a playlist of Hall & Oates, and an iced white chocolate mocha. On assignment, Ruthie is usually doing whatever's necessary to get the best possible photo, whether it be sloshing through a ditch, balancing on the roof of a skyscraper, flying in a blimp, or standing in a bathtub, and she loves every minute of it. Ruthie goes above and beyond for her clients, while also capturing as much personality, life, and storytelling in her images as possible. In today's episode, Ruthie and I dive in on treating your creative work as a business, how to get connected in new locations and building your tribe, and the importance of finding a partner who shares your values and complements your skills. Show notes for today's episode can be found at photoforward.media/podcast. So, without any further ado, my interview with Ruthie Hauge. Ruthie Hauge, welcome to the Photo Forward podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, there's a lot of different directions I kind of want to go in today's conversation, some of your history, some of your work here in Madison. But one of the things we talked about recently at a networking event that we ran into each other at was kind of getting at the difference between being a photographer and being a photojournalist. And you had a lot of stuff to say. So kind of tell me what comes to mind when you think about what it means to be a photojournalist and have sort of a photojournalist mindset in your work.
Photojournalism to me means taking more of a hands-off approach to photography and letting the story unfold the way that it was meant to be without my hand in it or my input. So stepping back, waiting for the moment to happen instead of creating the moment, and just being really patient. A lot of times I'll just stock an image, just wait for it to happen.
So you mean that you don't have to force things to make great pictures? Correct.
And I can't stand cheesy photography. So I think, the more forced it looks, the more I cringe at it.
Yeah. I mean, it's become more of a trend to kind of have that authenticity to your style, your visual style. I mean, the idea of the photojournalist wedding photographer has probably only really come in the last maybe 10, 15 years.
Yeah, it's true. And I think a lot of clients don't quite grasp what that really means.
So how are you having those conversations with clients, whether it's weddings, whether it's portraits, whether it's events, about your approach as a photojournalist?
I have found that I don't really have to have that conversation much anymore since I've rebranded and put my style very forward in my branding and my website. A lot of people come to me because they like that style, so I don't really need to explain how I go about things. But I do sometimes on occasion come across a bride who has a lot of Pinterest pins and, they try to tell me that that's how they want me to do things. And I explain to them that I can't reproduce that moment. I can't reproduce that light. I can't reproduce that background. All of those bridesmaids look like supermodels, and you're just setting yourself up for disappointment because I can't do what somebody else did. I can do what I do. So I actually tell them to go ahead and delete their Pinterest page because I don't want them to be disappointed, and we're going to make pictures that are Pinterest worthy on our own together.
So do you find that there are some clients that you just say, you know what, this isn't quite the right fit? What does it mean to you to have to turn down a client potentially?
I do that. If there's red flags, I'll turn down clients for sure. I mean, we're at the point in our business where we're 14 years in, we're getting a steady stream of clients and quite a variety of clients and different events, different marketing photos, you name it, that I don't really need to say yes to everyone anymore. The hard part is how to figure out how to turn them away. I've never really said to someone, I don't think we're a good fit. I don't think that's necessary. I mean, generally I'm just booked up.
That makes sense. What do you think the role for, this is a bit more of a philosophical question, but what do you think the role of photojournalism is, or the future? Like, what do you think the future of photojournalism is? Do you think it still has a place?
Absolutely. It might not be as a staff photographer for a printed newspaper, but I do photojournalism every day. And lately I've been getting into food photography, which I've done my whole career. Assignments for the paper, I would have to go shoot food, or just small business photography I've had to shoot it, but I never formally learned how to do it. And one thing I've realized in that process of learning it is how different it is from photojournalism. Photojournalism is being thrown into the fire, into the chaos, and making that great picture and navigating through it. But then food photography is just really quiet and really focused and really controlled. And it's a really good kind of counterintuitive thing to what I've always done. But it's kind of taught me that journalism has a place, that I do it in every other aspect of my job, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about kind of bringing photojournalism into the everyday, but I want to go back a little bit. We'll get into your current work in a little, but I want to know kind of how you got started out in photography, because everybody's got their story about how they got started. Tell me a little bit about yours.
I actually started in high school. I just took a photo class, and it was kind of more fun at that point. And even in my first year of college, I went to Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design, and I thought I would be majoring in drawing there. But I kind of was like, what am I going to do with a drawing degree? And, my parents were like, oh, thank God you figured that out. But I majored in photography and I minored in drawing. And from there, I decided to pursue a career in photojournalism because we had a speaker come from the Irish Times to my ed, and she showed her work, and she was having a show locally of Irish photojournalists' work. And I was so inspired by that. I mean, I remember almost every word she said just so clearly. And I remember the feeling of being like, wow, this is what I'm going to do. I need to stop photographing trees. And, which I didn't know what else I was doing at that point besides just kind of street photography and nature photography. And follow this woman and see what I can learn from her. So,
what was the photographer's name?
Brenda Fitzsimons. She's now the photo editor of the Irish Times out of Dublin.
What specifically about her talk really kind of spoke to you or connected with you? It sounds like it had a really big impact.
Yeah, it was just so exciting what she did. Every day was different. And I'm the kind of person that can't really handle every day being the same. So, the routine of going to an office didn't work for me. And this was the extreme opposite of that. The world is your office, and the people she was meeting and the photos she was showing of, the Irish president, and just, that from the Galway races, which is like the Kentucky Derby with these women with gorgeous hats, and, all these really crazy experiences that run the gamut of life just really spoke to me.
Mm-hmm. So you kind of had this this kind of come to Jesus moment for photojournalism. Like what was the next step after that, or kind of what was your first kind of paid photo gig job essentially after that?
I went to Ireland. I followed her around. I came back and decided that's what I'm going to do. So
you literally followed her in
I
her
did.
footsteps.
I lived in her house for 3 weeks. And yeah, I went to the Irish White House and photographed the president with her. And yeah, I had a blast. And then from there, I knew that's what I wanted to do, but my ed is a fine arts program. So I went to the dean and said, here's what I want to do. My ed doesn't really offer this technically, but how can I make this happen? And we came up with our own job shadowing program. And I reached out to then photo editor of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, Mark Hoffman, who is just this awesome mentor to so many people. And I kind of said, hey, can I come hang out with you? Can you send me on some assignments with other photographers? And he said yes. He let me go. I learned a bunch. I got to sit at the photo desk and just see how a newsroom works. And they gave me my first assignments from there.
Do you remember your first assignment?
It was a grip and grin. It was one of those galas where you have to go and get pictures of 3 people lined up and then 4 people lined up. So really, it's kind of the opposite of photojournalism. But it was going to be in a newspaper, and I was so excited.
Yeah, I think my first assignment when I was an intern out in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, was absolutely one of those. Just grip and grin. I think a literal passing of a check.
Yeah. But then from there, I went to Illinois. I followed a boyfriend there, but I'm from the Chicago area, so I was basically just going back home. And I picked up some jobs with the Northwest Herald. Those were my next photojournalism assignments, which is Shaw Media. And then I started working with Pioneer Press, which is part of Sun Times Media, and eventually was hired there.
Okay. So we're going to get into your time at the Sun Times, because that is kind of a story in and of itself. But as you're kind of getting started in the photojournalism newspaper world, where were you finding your sort of creative inspiration from, or how did you approach assignments in those early days?
I think I was just so naive, and I was such a beginner at that point that everything was so pure and raw. And I don't know that I can get back to that place of photojournalism that I was when I first started, because I don't know, I just felt so excited. And every assignment I stepped into, and I really waited for those moments, and I really watched for them. And, part of photojournalism is anticipating and knowing what might happen and being in the right place for that. And then the other part is being patient. And I think I really exercised those skills particularly well in the beginning, because I didn't know what else to do with myself.
It's really interesting, because that's, I think, the opposite of most young photographers. Is they're jumpy, they're not patient, they're not waiting for moments, they're not looking for the light or anything. They're just kind of going on this sort of weird gut feel. It's interesting that you kind of had that baked in right from the start, was be patient, wait for the moment. And it kind of, it must have obviously helped you a lot.
Yeah. I think a lot of it was just kind of intuitive.
Mm-hmm. So at this point, you've just started doing some work with the Sun Times newspaper. Tell me a little bit about how you got that job and how that all started.
At that point, I was really just reaching out to every newspaper that had any position open. And my sister was working at Pioneer Press as a page layout person at the time. And so she just gave me the email address of the photo editor. And I just kind of blind emailed him and said, can I take an assignment maybe? Can I be a stringer on your stringer list? And he put me on there. It was a little slow to start, but, I think eventually I proved that I could do it, as a 22-year-old girl at that point. And a position opened up at the Doings newspaper down in Hinsdale, and they covered 13 towns there, part of Pioneer Press. And that photo editor really liked my work and really wanted me to be on staff there. So he really had to fight for that position and fight for me to be there, which I really, felt so appreciative that at that age I was so young. And I got that position. So I actually started there at kind of one of the small, local publications of Pioneer Press.
Mm-hmm. So how are you making it work? I like getting into this with people because everyone sees where photographers get to and they don't see the journey that gets them there. So how are you making this work, honestly, financially, as a stringer trying to pull together enough assignments? Like how did you make that work before the positions opened up with Sun Times?
I was working at a children's portrait studio on the side.
Really?
So yeah, I was still a staff photographer, but doing kids portraits, which I am not a studio photographer, really. I mean, in that regard, it's not loose enough. It's not journalistic enough. But I loved the people that worked there, and I loved the owners, and they treated us really well. So, it was a great way to tide me over. But I was taking assignments on the side the whole time and kind of starting to build my name.
How did you not get creatively burnt out doing that?
Oh, I totally did.
You did?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when it was Easter and they would bring in little baby chicks and bunnies and I would see these kids like strangle them. And oh God, I couldn't handle it at all. I think I cried on a curb one day after one of those shoots.
Oh God, the horror stories.
Yes.
I mean, that's something that's become, I think, more of the norm nowadays, is that you have your sort of a job that you're working towards, but you've got this other job that right now that will sort of tide you over for right now until you can get to that place. So
yeah.
It's a challenge. I mean, to keep yourself creatively free and, wanting to get up and do your creative work every day when you have a job that doesn't give back to you.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So you've made it to the Sun Times. You start working with them. What was that like, having that full-time position at the paper?
It was fantastic. I mean, I loved it. And at that time, Sun Times was really quite separate from Pioneer Press in terms of operations. So really, I was hired to Pioneer Press under the Sun Times media umbrella. And eventually, as people were laid off and they were consolidating things, we were just kind of grouped into a group of Sun Times media photographers. And then we could, at that point, cover the entire Chicagoland area in any of the Sun Times media papers. So that was pretty cool. But at that time, it was very basic, very local assignments. But I had a blast. I mean, just shooting everything and anything in these small towns. And one of my favorite things about it was just getting to know these towns so well. And from the doings, I then was put into the whole umbrella of Pioneer Press, which at that time covered 63 towns. And I would tell people that I knew these 63 towns so well. I could tell anybody that wanted to move to the Chicagoland area anything about any of these suburbs. And it was very personal. It got to the point where I would know some of these students I was photographing sports at by name, and I'd know what college they were going to go to, and I'd wish them luck when they graduated, and I loved that because I'm a people person too.
So were there any particular kind of longer term stories that you worked on that are memorable to you, that you really kind of connected with, that you really enjoyed working on the most?
There was a few, yeah. One was a woman who was a professional race walker and on the Team USA. She made it to the Olympic trials in Eugene, Oregon in 2008. And I got to follow her story from her training at home in her neighborhood in Northbrook, Illinois, to actually flying out to Oregon with her and being there at the Olympic trials. And that was incredible. And that was a mixed media piece. So it was video and stills. At that time, Sun Times was really pushing us to do both. Okay.
And that was probably in pretty early days of video being accessible.
That was 2008. So it was really pushed. It was very important. I think everybody was aware that that's where the magical interwebs were going and they needed to do this. So there was a huge emphasis on us doing that.
What about that story kind of connected with you the most, that you enjoyed working on it? Was it just kind of her character, or just the idea of the walking through life sort of thing, or what about it?
She has such a fantastic energy, and I'm the kind of person that I read people's energy instantly, and I'm attracted to people's energy. And she was enthusiastic, and she's also really nurturing and open and wanted me to be part of this journey through her life. And I kind of blind called her. I ran a race in Chicago, and there was a magazine in our race packet, and she was featured in a little article in one of these magazines, runners magazines. And so I kind of did my research and found out where she was at and reached out to her. And I ended up sleeping over at her house one night so that I could wake up and shoot her alarm going off at 4:30 or 5 or whatever ungodly time in the morning. So I could tell the whole story. I slept in her basement and made that happen, and, kind of spent the whole day training with her and going to PTs in Chicago and all that. But I'd say the best part of that whole story was actually going to Hayward Field in Eugene, Oregon, which is just known for the most amazing track and field stars, and feeling the energy of these so greatly inspired people who work so hard and do what they love.
So there is obviously the inevitable part of this story, unfortunately, we'll get to, that the Sun Times was the victim of some rather poor decision, perhaps on management's part. Tell me a little bit about your experience with the Sun Times removing the photography staff and what that meant for you kind of coping with that. And also, I guess, perhaps for those that don't know, give people a little bit of background on what did actually transpire at the Sun Times.
Okay, well, the threat of being laid off was there from day one. And so I was building my business on the side as a safety net, but also knowing that that's probably what I wanted to end up doing in the long run was working for myself. So when everything kind of really downshifted was right around the time that I got pregnant with my first son, and I was kind of planning to leave anyway. So after he was born, I left the paper, and then it was about 9-ish months later that they laid off the entire photography staff. So all of my coworkers and friends that I worked with were then without a job all of a sudden, and it was a huge shock. And the way it went down was that they called everybody into a meeting downtown at the big office downtown. And it was really rare that we were all called to a meeting, especially to downtown. Usually we would be called to our individual offices, wherever they may be throughout the Chicagoland area, if there was some kind of a meeting. So I think everybody kind of knew something was up, but I don't know that they realized the proportions of it.
Yeah. And the fact that you had kind of made that transition out of the newspaper right before all of this happened. I mean, looking back on that, like what goes through your mind when you think about like how different that could have been? I
was ready to go at that point. So I'm glad I left on my own terms, and I can't say bad things about the people I worked under, because they really saw something in me and really supported me, and from day one. So I think a lot of people are angry towards them and there's resentment there, but I can't be mad at them. I mean, they were practically family, and I think I got this reputation maybe of being an ass kisser, or of having a relationship with the management and the managing editors, I should say. But we had a lot of respect for each other, and I felt that, and it really helped me grow as a photojournalist.
So you kind of knew you wanted to do the independent thing, to be an independent photographer. How did you start doing the work and preparing financially to make that transition to being independent while you still had that staff role?
I was shooting for my own business pretty much every time I had a day off, and sometimes I would have to take vacation days to take clients. So my clientele had built up quite a bit by the time I actually left. I started the business in 2005, when I graduated from college. So it was, I left in 2012. So that was a pretty good run of building a business when I actually left the paper. And so it was really quite seamless. And I ended up making more money at my business right away than I made on staff at Sun Times.
What do you think it takes to have the mindset? Because it's interesting. You mentioned this a few times. You talk about your business. You don't talk about it as oh, I do photography. You talk about it as your business, and it seems like you've had that mindset of it being a business and not just a thing you do. How did you grow that mindset? How did you kind of have that approach?
Honestly, I don't remember it being any other way. I think perhaps I'm just a businesswoman in heart and also an artist. It's most people are one or the other, but I think I'm just both. And it helps too that I met my husband about 6 months into our relationship. He took over the books for my business, which is where I am very flawed with numbers and math. So I'm really glad he came along and did that. But he also gave me a lot of guidance that's been really helpful and sort of empowered me and told me that, he's the one that said I don't need to take clients that aren't worth my time. And in that early age of business, you're like, I got to take everybody. I got to shoot stuff for free. I've got to make a name. I've got to build a portfolio. But he gave me not only the confidence, but gave me the numbers to show that, hey, you don't need to do that. You're doing fine. And I think that's where a lot of artists don't really pay as much attention as, those numbers and that bookkeeping and all those things that prove where you're going. I could be wrong though, but it seems like a lot of people are saying they need a person that does for me what my husband does.
Yeah.
I just said that already.
I'd take one of him. Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
So you get into the idea of, being able to say no to projects. I want to kind of transition over here, as we talked a little bit about how you were starting a family, into how you balance your creative work as an independent photographer and family life at the same time. And how do you find that middle ground where you're content in your creative work and you're content in your personal life?
It's rough. I'm a hot mess most of the time. And people will say, God, you're Wonder Woman. How do you do all this? How do you balance this? The truth is that I don't ever stop moving or thinking or working. And, I think a lot of moms at least get to take a little bit of time for themselves and maybe watch a TV show once a week, twice a week. I don't know. But I am constantly getting emails from clients. And if I don't respond right away, I don't get the gig because somebody responded faster than me. So any working mom or entrepreneur mom understands that we're just never off. So I don't know that it's as much of a balance as just working ourselves to the bone, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. So we talked a little bit about that transition over to being an independent photographer from the staff role. And as if running an independent photography business wasn't enough, you guys decided to make a geographic change as well to come here to Madison, Wisconsin. Tell me a little bit about how you made the decision to do it, what went into it from a business standpoint to build up, enough of a business presence here in Madison.
Well, the move here was, it was at a point where we had been living in a far suburb of Chicago for 3 years, and I was bored out of my mind. There was barely anyone there that I could connect with, and I'm a people person. I make friends easily, and I just couldn't find my tribe. I'm a little bit of a free bird and a fire starter, and my husband's the complete opposite. So I knew I wanted to get out of Illinois, and I think my husband agreed with me on that. But we didn't want to be too far from our families who are still in the Chicagoland area. So Madison seemed like the perfect mix of the things we were looking for: outdoor recreation, entrepreneurship, cool people, a music scene, just politically forward, just a cool scene, cool place to live, and also being close to our family. So it seemed like everything was lined up, right, to move to this perfect place. But that one thing that made me nervous about it was moving my business to a different state. I have this fantastic, loyal group of customers in Illinois that would hire me every single year. Or, if they were wedding clients, it would be one person would hire me, and then their bridesmaids would hire me, and then their brother would hire me. And it was just to the point where I would know people when I showed up to a wedding, and I loved that, and that was fantastic. But I knew that Illinois wasn't right for me, and that I needed to find my tribe and find where I fit in. So we pulled the trigger on it. I kind of panicked and just joined as many networking groups and, went to as many coffees with other entrepreneurs as I could when I moved here, thinking that I had to just really hustle to rebuild. And that did help. A lot of people kind of took me under their wing and said, hey, I know somebody that could help you meet the right person, or I know somebody that needs that kind of photography. And they would actually follow through and introduce me to them. And that kind of started me on a sprint. And then all of a sudden I had more inquiries than I knew what to do with. And, part of it is just changing the SEO on your website and making sure that I had a really strong presence on social media too. But from there, we actually ended up having our best year ever in our first year in a new state, which is completely unexpected.
That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, that's quite an accomplishment. I mean, and I will say I've lived in Madison now for about 6 years or so, and it's not a huge place. So to say that you've had your best year in Madison coming from Illinois, I think that's really impressive.
I think part of it too is just finding my niche. It really helped that I don't specialize in any one kind of photography. I just do journalism wherever it's needed, if that makes sense. So I'll do journalism photography at a business. I'll do it at a bar mitzvah. I'll do it at a birthday party. I'll do it for a giant corporate event. So that was already in my portfolio, and obviously that came with me here. So when people started looking for photographers and contacting me, I was noticing that I was getting a lot of inquiries for everything but portraits and weddings. So I actually like that because that's more like my newspaper assignments and my newspaper days, and it's a lot of fun to change it up that way. So my business has kind of taken its own path since I moved here, and I'm doing a lot less weddings and portraits and a lot more corporate photography, marketing photography for small businesses and non-wedding events.
It's interesting, that idea of bringing journalism to every assignment and being okay with being a generalist. A lot of people in the photojournalism industry will tell you to never do that. They'll say, find your niche, find your topic, find your location, find your XYZ, and then narrow in and hone in on it as hard as you can. And that's the advice you hear a lot. So it's really interesting that your approach is, no. It's okay to have your narrow focus be the journalism style and applied to a lot of different areas.
That's exactly what I do. I'm too ADD to be focused on one thing.
There's nothing wrong with that, I don't think. Yeah.
And Brenda Fitzsimons, the photo editor at the Irish Times, when I shadowed her, there was one thing that she said to me that will always stick in my mind, and that was fake it till you make it. And so every single inquiry I got for something that was new or unusual, I would say, yeah, I can do that. And I would figure it out as I would go, because really that's so different than what I did at a newspaper every single day. You're thrown into whatever location with whatever lighting, with whatever chaos is happening, and you make the photo. So I had to say yes to that, to every assignment I got at the paper. So it was really no different. And that's kind of how I built this crazy broad portfolio, and I'm able to shoot whatever comes my way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I take a little bit, with my own work, I think I take a similar approach. I try to have a particular style that kind of flows throughout. But like you said, we get all of these different assignments from all different places. Say it's marketing, say it's food, all of this. And it should have that cohesive theme running throughout it, even if it's not the same content.
Right.
So what are some of the sort of pitfalls or things you wish you would have known before you made the jump to being an independent photographer?
Ooh, that's hard. I wouldn't change anything for the world. I mean, I love what I do, and I love the chaos behind it. Maybe if I knew ahead of time that I should be scheduling every single thing that needs to be done with each assignment, like the editing, the processing, the consultation time on my calendar, I probably would have been less stress, from the beginning. Because now I do that. Now it's like, okay, I've got this event I'm shooting. I need to allow 2 days of editing and processing. And I actually put that on my calendar, or consultations or, phone time with people. And it's really about time management. And that's something that's been learned. So if I knew that earlier, I would probably, not be drinking as much caffeine and stressing out as much as I do. But
what about in the financial aspect of, I guess, treating, like we said before, treating your business like a real business and looking at it through the lens of finances and paying yourself a salary? Like, what about that did you really need to focus on to make that transition smooth?
Marcus does most of that, so I don't know if I can answer
That's
that,
okay. I mean, but okay, so let's get into that a little more then. Like, what about what he does? How do you guys work together to make your creative side and his finance side meet in the middle and, grow a business together?
I think we're so yin and yang, and we're a really good match in that way. We're so opposite of each other, but it complements each other. I'm kind of this crazy artist type, and but I'm also I am business minded. I am rooted in being organized in that way. So, I mean, I do all the marketing, even though he's the one with the marketing degree, but he's the one that does the contracts, the bookkeeping, the taxes, he's the one that goes into my email and says, hey, you didn't respond to this client. You might want to do that. So he keeps me on task, with my 2,000 emails that are in my email box.
Was he always, throughout your whole growth of your independent business, like, was he always the one that took the sort of finance side, or were you doing it for a while and then one day said, you know what, this isn't working?
He's been doing it pretty much since we started our relationship. I mean, my mom was doing my taxes and bookkeeping when we met. I think I was 24 or something. And yeah, he took it over and he's been doing that ever since.
So is there anything else that you would say to it's kind of the quintessential question of what would you say to your past self before you went into being an independent photographer?
Don't take yourself too seriously. And don't listen to the noise. I think being at Sun Times Media was really a rough start for me emotionally, because a lot of people, I think because it's a male-dominated field, a lot of people made me feel like I didn't belong there or I didn't earn my keep. And so that stuck in my head for a good long time. And I think even up until moving to Madison, I still had a fragment of that in my mind, that I didn't deserve to be where I am and that my work wasn't good enough.
How'd you get past that?
I mean, moving here,
really, how does anyone get past that?
It's hard. It's really hard. I mean, I think part of it has to do with the fact that I'm female in a male-dominated field of photojournalism, but part of it was just me moving here and meeting a really awesome group of photographers who are really supportive and validated that I can hang with them, that I don't have they don't have my story, they don't know who I worked for or how long I worked there, or how I got any job or how I got any assignment or what my work even looked like before when I worked at a paper. And so it was like this great fresh start for people to see me for who I am and to see the work that I'm producing today. And they respected me. And I think that was a good eye-opening moment to say, like, hey, this is a fresh start with people who can see me for who I am.
I do want to go back quickly. What did you mean when you said, don't take yourself so seriously? 'Cause it sounds like you're referencing something pretty particular. What about that piece of advice to your past self specifically?
You don't overthink things. When I'm shooting something that's brand new, sometimes depending on the client, depending on how much pressure they're putting on me, I might freak myself out walking in. And I just have to remember, I've done this so many times now. I've got 12 terabytes of photos on my on my external hard drive. I can do this. I know what I'm doing. And I think I just need to give myself that reassurance and not let myself get in my head.
That's good advice for just about everybody. I think that little nagging voice in the back of your head, I don't know if it ever does go away, maybe one day.
Yeah. Yeah. At this point, I think for the most part, I've gotten over it. But I mean, last week I had a client who we had to hold a whole meeting with different people over the phone about a specific shot. And these people are from all over the country, and they're, executives and, VIPs, right? And so it's a portrait. It's a group portrait. Like, how many group portraits have I taken in my career? More than I can count. And for some reason, I'm still like, oh God, this is this really important portrait. I can't mess it up. I got to do this right. And it was fine. They loved it. But, I think that the more people kind of crowd in on us as photojournalists, the less beneficial it is to the outcome of the work, if that makes sense. We need kind of our space to just be really intuitive.
I like that. So you mentioned some of the challenges of being a woman in photojournalism, which is kind of a male-dominated industry. Tell me a little bit more about that. Any particular events that come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, the backstory is that there was whispering behind my back that I was hired to Sun Times Media because my sister worked there. And I mean, she was just a page layout person when I was hired. So she didn't have a lot of pull, let's be honest. But I felt like I had to really prove who I was and what I could do, and it was never good enough. And one particular example of that is that I was chosen to go to Haiti after the 2010 earthquake out of, all the staff, and really in the Sun Times, because it was a suburban doctor going there and doing charity work at the Haiti Medishare Hospital. And they wanted me to go along and cover it. So I was so honored that it was me, but everybody else was whispering that I only got it because my sister worked there. And at that point, I had been there for 4 years already, and I had earned a good number of photojournalism awards nationally and statewide. So in my head, I could say that to myself, like, hey, you won those awards. Your sister didn't win them for you. But that didn't seem to really matter to anybody else. And they all kind of thought that, I was buddies with management because of my sister, and that's how I got this. So that was rough. And I won a lot of awards from those photos that I took in Haiti. And I have to remind myself that, screw you guys, that I can do this. And I did do this. And, part of me thinks that I was also hired or chosen to do that because I have, I'm a people person, and I'm a humanitarian. I connect with people, and I'm not arrogant in that way. I want to know people's stories, and I want to know what makes their struggle different from other people's struggles. And I want to support them. I want to support people so desperately that need it. And I do believe that management saw that in me and recognized that just because I gave them the chance to get to know me, which I think a lot of other photographers didn't. They didn't want to spend the time to have coffee with them or talk with them.
So how did you deal with that? I mean, this is how many years ago now? So that was 2010, you said? Mm-hmm. So that's, 9 years ago. I think photojournalism only in the last few is really having this sort of reckoning about the perils of it having been a male-dominated industry. I mean, how did you work through some of those struggles? Were you the only female photographer on the staff?
No, there was, at the Pioneer Press, there was 5 of us. That was a fairly good number for the size of our staff. I think there was 13 photographers overall at Pioneer Press or so. But I think we all had our struggles with that. And I know, there was some sexual harassment cases that were taken to HR, and it's a struggle. I think it's a struggle for all women in all jobs, especially ones that are dominated by males. But, you not only have to prove yourself, but you have to deal with these comments that we get. There's times where I've been asked, on the sidelines of a football game, what's a little girl like you doing on the sidelines of a football game? Or, I'm sure every single one of us has heard, what's a little girl like you doing with a lens that big, or, they try to make small talk about the gear and, find ways to talk to us. And it's just creepy, to be honest. So, there's all this kind of static that we had to trudge through to make our pictures.
Yeah. Now I see what you mean about not listening to the noise. All right. So we've done a lot of reflecting on the past and your kind of history as a photographer. I want to get into a little bit of what you're doing now. Tell me a little bit about a notable project or something you've been working on recently that's got you really excited.
I have been working with Madison magazine since I moved here, just on a freelance basis, and I've absolutely loved it. I love the little assignments I get for them, and some of the bigger ones. And one I just wrapped over the winter was a transgender youth story, and that one I loved shooting that so much because it really pushed me and my boundaries, and just trying to be really accepting and really open to people who go through a struggle that I don't need to deal with personally. Like I said, that drives me, and that, I have so much compassion for people. And I just really wanted to do justice to these kids who don't have quite the voice that adults have, but also their parents who are just trying to support their kid in a really challenging realm of the world. So that was an awesome story, and I hope I did justice to these kids and their families with the photos. And it seems that the art director there is giving me a lot of the PJ assignments, the ones that are more storytelling, and I really appreciate that, and I really love that. And then another thing I've noticed is I'm just getting these crazy corporate gigs from other states that are like the assignment is here.
Really?
Yeah, the assignment is here, but whomever is hiring me doesn't live here. They're from somewhere else. So something in my SEO on my website is attracting these companies from elsewhere, and it's fun. It's exciting. I mean, I've got one bid out right now to shoot 30 some properties all over the state of Wisconsin. I've got this other bid out to shoot for a cookbook. I'm shooting another cookbook currently. So yeah, I'm just doing a little bit of everything right now.
Mm-hmm. So with all these different styles of photography, different pieces of work, how are you going about like pricing all of these? I think that's one of these big questions for independent photographers when you aren't necessarily given, say, a day rate as a photojournalist. How are you going about pricing the work that you take on?
That's a great question, because I think a lot of people struggle with that. And the first thing I did when I moved to Madison was check out the work and the websites of other photographers that I felt were at my same level of skill and quality. And I priced myself with them. And I think that that's what we all need to do, because it's the people who price themselves lower that bring down the entire industry. And don't we all just want to make more? Aren't we entitled to a retirement plan like anybody that works at a, regular full-time job that is, on staff somewhere? So why wouldn't we do that? Why wouldn't we all make ourselves equal so that people who are shopping around for photographers are choosing us based on our style and our art, and just have an even playing field? So that's what I did when I moved here. Initially, I think my pricing has been just a back and forth game of just figuring out what people will pay for. And if you're too low, you attract people who don't really appreciate your art and are, like kind of micromanaging. And then the same goes for if you price yourself too high, then you get like very wealthy people who are micromanaging because they want to have it exactly perfect the way that they see it, because that's how they're used to getting it. So the goal is to kind of be somewhere in that happy medium.
What do you say to the photographer who's maybe just starting out, not quite making photography their full-time income, that says, yeah, that's great, but if I don't price myself appropriately, I don't have enough money in the bank to make rent this month, or I need to get this bid, so I do have to bid a little bit lower?
I also think those are the same people who are shooting stuff for free for people, though. So, I would argue stop shooting shit for free. Mm-hmm. When you're starting out, you need to build a portfolio. That's one thing, but you can do things at a reduced rate with an understanding that I am trying to build my portfolio and this is a temporary thing, and that you have to set a limit to yourself that, hey, once I have this many clients or once I have this much income, I'm going to raise my fees, 15%, 20%, whatever it is, and actually do that.
And just being deliberate about it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting. I think my approach has often been, in a weird way, the opposite of that. I think I tend to lean towards, I either work for free or full price. Those have been kind of my thing, because I think free, I think it does get a bad rap sometimes, that doing work on spec can lead to larger work, but for me, it's always been kind of free or full price.
Yeah. I think a good way to do it too is to try to find charities and work with them to build a portfolio, because I give my work to a couple charities a year intentionally, and it's okay to give stuff to a charity for free, right? Especially if it's something you believe in. So giving your work for free to whomever, an engagement session that calls, or a restaurant that wants something for free, or a wedding that says, can you shoot this for $1,000 or whatever, that's where you're going to get yourself in a hole, and people are going to expect that, because what are those people going to do? They're going to go tell somebody about you because you were cheap, not because you were great, right? Because everybody focuses on the dollar amount when it's that price point.
It's a tricky game we have to play.
It is. Mm-hmm. It is. But I've also learned the more confident you are in the prices you set, the better off you're going to be. And so now when people come to my website, the pricing is all laid out there, except for weddings, because there's too many moving pieces there to actually put pricing right online. They can't negotiate with me. It's very upfront. It's very forward. And I tell people this all the time. You can't go into Nordstrom and go up to the sales clerk and say, I want this dress, but I only want to pay $300 for it, even though it's a $1,000 dress. You can't do that. So you can't expect, or you can't allow people to do that to you either. You are a business, you are legit, and you have to stand to your ground.
I like that. All right, Ruthie, this has been an awesome conversation. I just want to wrap things up here with a quick little lightning round series of questions. We'll tell people where they can find more about you, and then say goodbye.
All right.
What's the one thing in your bag that you never leave home without?
Oh, in my camera bag, my 24-70 and my Mark IV. Oh, and a flash. I always have a flash on, which people look at me funny for that, especially other photographers. But I almost always use a flash at a very low power, but just to light up the foreground a little bit.
That's great. It's a good style to kind of stick with. Yeah. What's the most important thing you've said no to in your career?
Oh, God. That's hard. I've had clients come in and tell me that they want the copyright to the images, the exclusive rights to the images I shot. And I tell them, well, that costs a whole lot more to buy out the copyright on the image. And then they say, well, I'm just going to go find somebody else to do it. And so that's something that's hard, because I don't want anybody else to get taken advantage of. But, that's something that I have to stand my ground on and say no. And as hard as it is to pass up whatever it is that they wanted me to shoot, I'm going to say, you know what? No, you can't. You can't have my right to use my art or to display my art unless you want to pay for it.
It was good. I just had to turn down a project in the last month or so for that exact same reason. So I want to say that to every photographer. Stand up for your ground and stick with your copyright unless they're willing to pay for it. Yes, exactly. Because if you don't, they're just going to take advantage of other people. And what sucks most is they go to students often who don't know yet. But yeah, hey, students, stand up for yourselves. Exactly. What do you do outside of photography that recharges you? Spin class. A lot of spinning. We have kayaks. I go rowing. Honestly, I work so much in the busy season that when I am not working, if I, kind of schedule a day off, all I want to do is just snuggle my boys and be home with my boys, because I'm gone all over the place. And I, just being home and doing nothing and staying in my comfies all day and, drinking too much coffee and not brushing my teeth until noon because I had so much coffee and, all these things. That's what kind of regrounds me so that I can start all over again the next day. Perfect. What advice would you give to a student graduating from university today about a career in, say, news or photography more generally?
You have a free pass, like this invisible card, to go and bug the hell out of people, and you should use it, because right now people want to mentor you and they want to show you the ways. But when you get a little bit older or a little bit further into your career, then they're going to say no to you. So find whoever is doing what you want to do and ask them if you can be their shadow.
Perfect. And last but certainly not least, where can people see more of your work or connect with you online?
My website is www.ruthiehauge.com. That's RUTHIEHAUGE. And then my Instagram is Ruthie Hauge Photography. I'm on Facebook under the same name, but I just kind of copy paste things from Instagram. So that's your best bet to go there first.
All right, perfect. Well, Ruthie Hauge, thank you for coming on the Photo Forward podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Enjoying listening to the Photo Forward podcast? Want to hear more thought-provoking, creative visual storytellers? Well, this is where you come in. We want to get the word out as wide as possible about Photo Forward and reach as many listeners as possible. And the best way to do that is through reviews and recommendations on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you consume your podcasts. If you want to support more deep dive conversations with photographers, videographers, and storytellers the world over, head on over to the Photo Forward page on iTunes and drop a review or even a rating. It means a ton to growing the show, and I personally read through each and every review to make this show the best damn visual storytelling podcast out there. So, as always, keep seeing, keep shooting, and keep putting your best photo forward. See you all soon.